For a long time, we have taken this approach of we're going to install our antivirus software, or we're going to install our threat detection software, and we're going to hope that it does a good job. And we have these products which in context are actually doing a great job, but not a good enough job at trying there to bat away the threats. They're standing there trying to capture these threats as they go into our environments. I was at a conference 2 weeks ago, back in the old days when conferences actually existed and we didn't sit in front of our computer screens. And I asked about 120 managed service providers in the room, how many of you have had clients who haven't had ransomware? And 2 or 3 people put their hands up, which is absolutely terrifying that happened. And the reason for this is because essentially, well, antivirus and threat detection software, or EDR software, is trying very hard to look for today's threats, and it is stopping a lot of threats. Unfortunately, the attackers are equally on the other end trying to figure out ways to go undetected. The way we approach security most of the time is instead of trying to, if we were to put it in the context of a house, instead of trying to, we essentially say anyone can come in my house unless they have a criminal record or they look suspicious. Whereas the way we should be approaching security is saying we only want to let those in who we trust. And that isn't just at the firewall level, but also at the endpoint level. So what I'd like to do today is kind of show you a different approach to endpoint security, to show you how you can lock down your endpoints, you can lock down your servers with a zero trust model. And instead of trying to block known threats, you actually block everything, and then you allow what you need. And how you can do that as a small managed service provider. There are a few levels in the way ThreatLocker works. The first is what we often refer to as application whitelisting. The idea with whitelisting is instead of trying to block malware, or instead of trying to block explicit apps we don't like, we block everything, and then we allow the applications we want. This philosophy, this approach, has been used by the federal government, big departments like the Department of Defense, big banks like Bank of America for many years. And it's extremely effective because we're not hoping that our antivirus is going to stop the next threat. We're basically saying we don't care if our antivirus stops it because we're not going to allow it unless we have a business need to run it. The problem with this approach has always been how difficult it is for a small business or a medium business, even where you've got a small IT department or a managed service provider to manage, because there are a lot of files on your computer that you need to allow. So I'm going to show you how we've tackled that issue head on and how you can use this zero trust approach in your environment with very little overhead. The other thing I'm going to show you is what we refer to as ring fencing. And every time you run an application on your computer, every time you download, whether it's Solitaire or Microsoft Office or PowerShell, that application has access to everything that you have access to. So if you open a Word document, even if you're not an administrator, and that Word document goes out to the internet, downloads a PowerShell script or a command file or an executable, when that runs, even as a normal user, it can encrypt all your files, it can access all your data, it can do whatever it wants. The same applies if you open Angry Birds on your computer, and Angry Birds has a vulnerability in its code, which hopefully it doesn't, then it could potentially be used and exploited and used against you and to access your data. Or even if the vendor goes rogue, we saw a Daemon Tools back 10 years ago where the vendor decided they were going to sell their soul and use it to push out adware. Again, if they go rogue and decide they're going to use the software for bad purposes, it has access to everything you have access to. So the idea with ring fencing is we're not just trying to control what can run, because of course we don't want things to run that shouldn't be able to run, because if they can't run, they can't access your data. But we also want to limit things that can run and define what they can do. So something like PowerShell, it needs to run and it needs a lot of power on your system, but it probably doesn't need to have access to your network shares. And if it does, it's probably limited to one share where you store your software. Again, Office needs to run, but it probably doesn't need to call PowerShell or maybe go out to the internet or at least limited internet sites. So if we can ring fence applications, if we can say, okay, we're not just going to assume that this application is good. We're going to take a zero trust approach by not trusting anything we don't need. And then we're going to take a zero trust approach for the things that we do allow to run and say we're going to limit what they can do. All of these things essentially reduce your surface area of attack. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can lock down storage devices as well, and not just traditional storage devices in terms of USB drives, but also storage devices in terms of storage devices in terms of network shares and things like that. Now, I will apologize up front because just like everybody else, I am working from home today. So hopefully my internet's going to hold up, my audio equipment's going to hold up, and my children aren't going to misbehave in the background and start screaming at each other because they're now quarantined for 2 weeks in the same house together. And you can imagine how that works if you have children. So, okay, before I begin, Misty, do you have any questions, or do you want to lead with anything, or are we good to go?
We are good to go.
Okay, and just for those who don't know, Misty and Mike are with the 20. I suppose I may say this wrong, so please correct me. They're essentially a group of MSPs that work together to improve their services and buying power with vendors. So I know we have a lot of 20 members with us today, and for those who don't, that's who the 20 are. Okay, cool. So the first thing is with ThreatLocker, we wanted to take these enterprises zero trust approach, and we wanted to make it easy for MSPs. And the biggest challenge, the first challenge we had to get over, not the biggest, was how do we deploy this and make it really easy? Because unlike a big enterprise, you guys do have tools, but you also have lots of customers, and we wanted to make sure we integrated into those. So when you sign up for ThreatLocker, and whether you sign up for a trial or you're using ThreatLocker, the deployment has to be really easy. So the first thing that happens when you sign in as a managed service provider, you're going to see all of your clients in one place. You can create new clients here, but the reality is you don't have to. If you're using Kaseya RMM or ConnectWise Automate or SolarWinds MCentral or whatever the RMM you're using, you can import the scripts into the RMM, and not only will it push the agent out, but it'll automatically create the client on our system for you. So if you pick a computer in one client and the client doesn't exist, it will create it. If it does exist, it will match it with that client and import the computer. The first thing that happens is the computer gets registered. And at this point, we're not going to block anything because we're not looking for threats. We're trying to figure out, what does your environment normally look like? What software do you run day to day? What files do you run? The average computer has somewhere between 20 and 60,000 files, DLL files, script files, executable files. And if you're trying to catalog that by yourself, that can be a massive overhead. So the first thing we're going to do is put your computers in monitor only mode. We're going to start logging what's happening on your computers. We're going to baseline the files we find, catalog all the hashes, catalog all the DLLs and the executable files. And we're going to start logging everything that's running. So if somebody opens a program, whether it's a good program or a bad program, I didn't mean to say deny, we're going to log that in the audit. So who opened it, who it's signed by, where they're running. For you guys who have people working from home now, the perimeter has now disappeared. So this is really useful as well, because even if they're sitting at home, you can see what programs they're opening and make sure they're not opening untrusted programs. So we can go into here, we can see who's running what, we're going to catalog what's on the machine. And within a couple of hours of deploying, we're going to start to build policies for you. Now, again, we're not here to say what you should or shouldn't run, but what we're going to do is catalog what's in your environment now. So if we find Microsoft Office, if we find Firefox or Box or Kaseya RMM, we're going to say, we recognize these applications and we're going to create policies for you in our environment. We're also going to find applications we do not recognize, and healthcare apps, custom payroll apps, custom printer installs, scanner management apps, and all things like that. But we're also going to catalog them and create custom policies for you. We typically recommend you let this learn for a week. And what normally happens after a week is we'll actually set up a call with you. And whether you've deployed this to one client or 10 clients or all of your clients, we're going to set up a call and we're going to do what's called an audit review. The idea of this audit review is we're going to quickly review this policy list to see what's being created. But more importantly, we're going to have a look in the audit to say, what haven't we created? What will run here and would be denied if you were to put this live today? And what we're looking for here is two things. One is things that run from strange locations. So we're not going to profile everything we find on your computer. If there's things sitting in your downloads folder, we're going to consider that high risk. In certain temporary folders, we're going to consider high risk if it matches certain patterns. So we're not going to profile that, but we want to make sure that there's not something that's going to be blocked that we excluded because we consider it high risk. Normally, this is a relatively small subset of files. The other thing we're looking for here is, for those of you who've used the application whitelisting approach before, is anything that is potentially going to cause problems, is self-updating and isn't a built-in app, which I'll get into in a moment, like a payroll app that re-downloads a new unsigned DLL from the internet every single day. And I say payroll as an example because it's pretty much always payroll. And we're looking for this to say, if we turn this on, are we going to have any problems? And if we are, we're going to try and make we are going to make exceptions for these apps that we need to run. So we'll just literally go into here. We'll say, show me anything that would be denied. My machine's in lockdown. I have a lot of things running on here. So we have quite a few denies that we expect to see from like this virus in my documents folder and putty in my downloads folder and things like that. This will be in green when you're in monitor mode, so it won't actually be denied. Essentially, if we want to create an exceptions, we can create exceptions on the fly. So if I say, I want to allow this ThreatLocker installer, and yes, we do block our own installer for good reason. We could simply go in and permit it here. We block it because we don't want people uninstalling ThreatLocker without permission. Create any exceptions we need. And then once we're happy, we're going to uncheck this monitor only box. At this point, all of your computers are going to be locked down. Now, I said at the beginning that this is what we normally do. Given everyone's under a lot of pressure at the moment to get people working from home and to get people and to get people secure, and they don't have the resources, for the next 60 days, we're actually offering a service free of charge where we will go through the audit review for you, where we'll create any custom policies. And normally we do it with you. And we'll also deal with any approval requests for the first 60 days for you. So, and that's 24 hours a day. So if you want to get your clients locked down and you want to get them locked down sooner rather than later, push out the agent, take use of that service for the first 60 days. We're going to take care of everything for you. We're going to make sure the audits are reviewed. We make sure that anything that needs to be allowed is going to be allowed. And we're obviously doing that discretionary, what our cybersecurity heroes think is best. If you did want to do it yourself, you can still continue to do it yourself. But if you wanted to opt to that service, it's free of charge. The next thing is once you're happy, or once we're happy, if we're doing it for you, that there's nothing there that's being blocked that shouldn't be blocked, we'll uncheck the monitor only box. So you can uncheck the monitor only box. And now your computers are locked out. If somebody tries to run something that isn't trusted, whether it's a macro in a Word document or whether apparently I didn't deny putty, let me just delete from my last demo, which I thought I'd cleaned up after. Just delete anything that's not in use. Making sure I clean up all my apps from my last demo. So if somebody tries to run something that isn't in the whitelist, that hasn't been approved, that even through the automatic learning or manually approved, it's going to get blocked. And that includes things like putty, which I'm going to close from my previous opening as well. It's already open. Or malware. So if somebody downloads a Word document that has a piece of ransomware in it, tries to download something from the internet and run, it's going to get blocked. And just as a point, this is actually a piece of ransomware, and I'm going to show you a little bit of concerning information here. So this document went and downloaded something from the internet, tried to run it, and it was blocked. I've had this ransomware on my PC for 6 weeks now. I'm surprised that the web server it's downloading it from is still there. But what I'm more surprised about is even after 6 weeks, when I hit check virus total on this, no antivirus is picking it up as no malware, which is very concerning. So it doesn't matter what it is though they're trying to run and how it comes in. If it comes in through your RMM, if somebody hijacks your RMM and pushes it out, or somebody hijacks your antivirus that has RMM features built in and pushes it out, or even in 2017 with WannaCry, when it was pushed out through the kernel using an SMB exploit, it doesn't matter how it comes in, we're going to block it from running if it isn't trusted. If a user wants something, if they're trying to download something that isn't permitted, so they say, I actually need putty, and you're on the computer, you can always permit it for them there and then, or they can hit request permissions. You can get a ticket in your PSA, you can get an email, you can get a text message when they hit request, and you can go in here and approve it for them. It takes 30 seconds to approve. So I can see here, somebody's requested putty. I want to permit putty for the entire group. I can just simply say, ThreatLocker knows what putty is. I want to permit it for the workstations group. Use the matched application and hit permit. Now, the next thing I want to talk about was these matched applications. ThreatLocker has this concept of built-in applications. The idea with built-in applications is to solve the biggest challenge for whitelisting. Microsoft releases about 25,000 unique new files as part of Windows updates every single month across their 15 different versions of Windows 10, whatever it is now, and Windows Server. 70% of those files aren't signed. And that's just Windows updates. There's also Office updates, Kaseya updates, Firefox updates, Chrome updates, Stamps updates, Box updates, Putty updates. All of these apps are constantly updating, quite often by themselves in the background or through your third-party patching system. And one of the biggest challenges when you take a whitelisting approach is before you do those updates, you have to permit those new files. And you can create, for the applications that are really good at signing things, you can create rules based around signatures, but Microsoft certainly isn't. Google do 98% of Google Chrome, but they might as well do 0% because those two other files, or the 2 other percent, are really important. One of the great things about ThreatLocker is we have these concepts of built-in apps. We have over 200 built-in apps. If you're auto-patching it, it's probably going to be in here. If it's not, you should ask us to put it in here. We have a team that works 24 hours a day that updates those definitions. So if you have a policy for paint.net or for Office or for Chrome, we're not here to say you should, but it means the new version is going to be allowed as well. Somebody's asked if there's a web page with that 60-day offer. It's actually going out on an email. Well, it may have already gone out. So it was supposed to go out this morning. So if you don't have it, there'll be an email. And if you're already a ThreatLocker customer and you wish to subscribe to it, just request it from one of the cyber heroes. They'll send you a form that needs to be signed, and we can deal with that. And then we can get it up and running pretty quickly as well. Okay, so one question that's been asked about the baselining process as well. So the question is, wouldn't attempt to create a baseline when people aren't working in the office in their normal circumstances not give them an accurate baseline? Most of the time, the baseline is being done from the files that are on the machine. So there is a portion of it that runs like login scripts that might run from network drives and things like that. If they're not in the office, maybe that's going to be slightly different, or maybe some changes we made. But if you're cataloging what's on the machines to begin with, 99% of what's there is going to be cataloged. So then when you do come back to the office, there may be a few things that come up that need to be addressed, but it should be relatively small. And you can always put them in learning mode temporarily when they come back in the office to catalog that change. Okay. Now, the next part of this is we've seen how easy this is to deploy. It's very easy to push out. It's very easy to manage. The approval process is very easy. And you don't have to worry about all those updates that are going to cause you problems because we're taking care of the built-in apps. It really is very, very effective at stopping ransomware. And one of the other things it stops as well is Chrome extensions. And I bring this up because this is very topical at the moment. Google pulled over 500 Chrome extensions from their web store last month that were malware. Now, most people think, apparently I'm not clicking on the right link, most people think that Chrome extensions aren't particularly dangerous because they can't by themselves natively encrypt your files on your machine. However, if you use a password manager, you should know this. Whenever you type a password into a website, that password manager, whether it's LastPass or SolarWinds, pops up and says, do you want to save your password? It can do that because it has access to your passwords. It can read the password you're typing into your bank account. So when you install a Chrome extension, you have to trust that Chrome extension isn't going to steal your data incorrectly. So there's two potential threats. One is they're going to harvest data from websites you're reading and use that data against you, whether it's stealing passwords or injecting malware into plugins. The other concern is Chrome extensions, while they cannot natively access your files or shouldn't be able to, assuming there's no vulnerability in Chrome, they can spawn other applications. So they can spawn PowerShell, they can spawn command prompt, and they can use them to potentially launch attacks using the tools built into your operating system. So it's not just about blocking programs, but also things like web extensions that can potentially cause problems. If I went into here and I tried to install a web extension and add that to Chrome, just like everything else, that's going to get blocked because it's not allowed. We did make an upgrade for those of you users before in 5.23. which is now gone live, where not only we actually can show you the extension name in the audit, because Google likes to use these random file names that don't mean anything. Apparently I got logged out. So when you go into the audit.
Hey, Danny, we got a couple of questions. Do you want me to stop or you want to wait till the end?
No, go ahead.
Dalton asked, would attempting to create a baseline now when many users aren't working or aren't in the office create an incorrect representation of the client's normal operation? Can we start the baseline audit when the business is back to normal?
Okay. Yeah, and I just saw a message from Mike saying the audio dropped when we were reading the questions. Yeah, so that was the question we asked. So yes, it potentially most of the stuff is going to be captured on the computer, but there are remote files. Just to repeat it, because it sounds like the audio dropped out.
Okay.
So
and then somebody asked, is there a web page with 60 days after 60-day offer details?
Okay, the email's got, and again, the email's gone out on that today. So if you haven't got it, you will get it before the end of the day if you're on the mailing list or you signed up. So there isn't a web page as such, but we have sent an email out, and we'll be posting it on our social media accounts before the end of the day as well. Okay. So I was saying, yes. So for those of you who are frustrated before when someone has requested a Chrome extension, we don't know what it is. You can now see this directly in the audit, the name of the extension. So you don't just get that random file name that you have no idea what it is. And when it permits it, it's going to permit it based on the extension ID. So if it does update, the new extension will be allowed as well. The next part of the final part of this whitelisting part to blocking things that shouldn't be done is the concept of learning mode. It's a USB drive. We'll get onto those in a moment. For those of you who've used this whitelisting approach before, the updates are a big concern, the deployment's a big concern, and we've dealt with all that. But one of the other concerns is, what if I'm installing something that you don't have in your database? What if I'm installing a print driver that has 500 files? And obviously we don't know what every printer in the world is. And I permitted the installer and then another file got blocked, or I permitted this DLL and then 15 other DLLs got blocked. So what we did is we came up with this concept of installation mode, which has now been renamed to learning mode, and which allows you to put a computer into learning mode and track changes to the system or track what's trying to run to the system and figure out what's required to run this app. We have a built-in definition for Notepad++, but I'm going to create a custom one, just say I don't want to use the built-in, and I'll show you how this works. I could type correctly. Now, learning mode can be started here right from the tray as an admin, and it can be used. So I'm now learning what files are required to run Notepad++, and it's going to create a package for me. Apparently, it didn't create a package for me. I'm having a minor issue here where my computer is not responding correctly. Let's check. Oh, there you go. It's taking its time. Apparently the internet in my house isn't working so well. So I can now go through the installation of this process. I can either run it or I don't need to run it because it's tracked install files. When I hit end learning mode, what it does is it goes off into the policies. It creates a policy to allow the app. And it's worth noting as well, while we're waiting for this, these policies, they run in order very much like a firewall policy, and they can be applied to individual users. So if you wanted an application to only be permitted by certain users, you could do that. You can apply it to individual computers. You can apply it to computer groups, and you can apply it to even MSP level. So if you have RMM scripts that you want to allow across all your customers, you can create a policy for RMM scripts, and then you can permit your new scripts as you need be. Okay, you can see that application installed, and you can see here it tracked all of the files that were created during that installation. So those 20 files created, you can see the hashes of them. And while you might think, well, I know what files are required to run this app, you probably wouldn't think about this temp file that was required in the temp folder, the install options.dll, or this user info.dll that was required for the installation. So somebody's asked the question, when we're in learning mode, is that essentially nothing malicious is currently running or could be approved? So typically when you're using learning mode, most of the time you're doing it on install, and anything that's been denied before won't be allowed going forward. So yes, it is potential if you were to install new malware at that point in time, that you're suddenly adding that. We're not bypassing your antivirus. So if your antivirus blocks it, we're not going to bypass that. But it's not going to, it could potentially profile something. And so it is important that you don't just turn on learning mode and on a machine that's infested with malware or something like that. The idea is we open up that surface area for a very short amount of time, we catalog it, and now we have that catalog for all of the computers. What most people do is if they're installing a new app in their environment, unless it's a printer specific to the computer, they will actually go in and they'll make sure they'll install that on their virtual machine that they know is free and clean beforehand. And that was the question that we just answered, sorry. Okay, the next part of this is we've talked a lot about the whitelisting, and it really is very simple. It's very, very effective. It doesn't replace an antivirus in that we're not trying to tell you what you should and shouldn't run, but it will stop ransomware. It will stop malware. In addition to that, there's a lot of MSPs being impersonated at the moment where somebody's sending an email on their behalf or from a similar address, asking somebody to click on a team viewer link. This is also going to stop those remote access tools being used and other things being used to breach you. The next part of this is what I want to discuss is the ring fencing. Now, the idea with the ring fencing is not only are we controlling what can run, but we're controlling what it can do. And there's a few reasons you want to do this. I'm going to turn off a policy and show you an example first. The first one is Microsoft Office. So Microsoft Office is on your whitelist. It's on your allow list. It's a trusted application. It's allowed to run. PowerShell is probably going to be on your allow list, although you might restrict it for users as well. But that doesn't, potentially a user could get a Word document. It doesn't even need to have a macro in it. They think they're clicking on a Google link, and before they know it, oh, the policy hasn't turned off yet, so give it a second. Good. They click on a Word document, they click on a link, and suddenly it's opening PowerShell, piping in a command, launching another application that could essentially be weaponized against you. So what we did is we came up with this concept of ring fencing. The idea with ring fencing is not only could we control what an application could do, what an application could run, but we also control what applications could do once they're running. So for example, we want to say, okay, Microsoft Office is allowed to run, but that doesn't mean it should be able to talk to PowerShell or Command Prompt or C-Script or any of these other potentially weaponizable applications. So we ring fence it and say it can't talk to those applications. We have a whole bunch of suggested policies here that you could just add right out the box that are really going to help you with this. By turning on, another example of ring fencing is if we take something like PowerShell or RegServe or RunDLL or any of those other potential and often weaponized applications, we could say, okay, these applications are allowed to run, but we don't want them to be able to go out to the internet except these sites. We don't want them to be able to access our files except these files. So they can't go out to your network shares. They can't encrypt your files. The idea is at level 1, we're stopping the applications being able to be launched. We're stopping the attack being launched. So we're stopping Office from being able to call PowerShell. We're stopping Internet Explorer from being able to call PowerShell or Google Chrome or Firefox. So if you can't launch the application, you can't weaponize that tool. The next level is we're assuming that somehow that gets weaponized and it's going to get used against you. So what we do is we say, okay, when you do manage to run PowerShell, don't let it go out to the internet. Don't let it download a payload. Don't let it download malicious code or RegServe or RunDLL, because one of the terrifying things about RegServe is it's been used in so many ransomware attacks that it's almost invisible, because you could basically run RegServe, point it at a GitHub repository, get it to download remote code, load that code into protected memory. It can't be seen by your antivirus. All your antivirus can do is shut down RegServe once it's done enough damage. But if you can ring fence it and stop it going out to the internet, which it doesn't need to ever, you can stop it downloading at payload. And then the third level is, even if it does get its payload, we don't need to think about how, because it's what we don't know is going to hurt us. But if it does get its payload, it can't encrypt your files because it can't access those files. So the next stage of this is simply we're saying, don't let them access our files. So now with these enabled, if we look at step 1, we say, okay, Office tries to run. It tries to launch PowerShell. It can't be launched. Or whether it's Chrome or Office or Internet Explorer, it can't launch PowerShell. Even if they do manage to launch PowerShell and they try to go out to the internet to get a payload, it can't go out to the internet except trusted sites. Let's assume it manages to get its payload. It can't access my data. It can't access my network shares. It can't access any other protected data. And all of this you can see in the audit here. So we can see here that PowerShell tried to get launched. That's when I actually launched it manually. PowerShell tried to get launched and we ring fenced it because of this policy. If we want to change that policy, we can click on it and change it. Then PowerShell tried to go out to the internet to access Google. We tried to access Google. It was denied. We can easily go in here and add that as an exception. It takes 30 seconds. It's applied. So we can add our RMM servers in. We can add the Office 365 server so we need it to access in. And then it tried to access my files. Again, it couldn't happen. Another great use of PowerShell, and this is really useful for people working from home now, is when something's ring-fenced, even if you permit everything on it. So I have Google Chrome ring-fenced, for example. And I've basically said here, Google Chrome can access anything on the internet on port 80 or port 443. I could say any ports. I've stopped it spawning these applications, but because it's ring-fenced, I can go into here and I can see everything that process is doing. So if a user opens Google Chrome, goes out to the internet, accesses websites, you're going to be able to see this. This is useful as well. If it's making changes to the registry, you can see that. It's almost like having Wireshark running in a managed environment. You can see everything that app's doing, see where it's going out to the internet. And then if you want to put deny policies, you can put deny policies in place. This is useful for employers who are looking to help track their employees working from home, make sure they're actually working throughout the day as well. Now, one final thing on ring fencing, if you want to get really deep into it, like we have in ThreatLocker, you can even do things like define what types of files things can access. So I've said Google Chrome cannot access any files apart from PDF files. Now, that might be a little overkill for some people because they need to upload things into their Gmail, send emails. But in this case, I've said it can't access any files, which means employees can't go into Chrome and send anything to the internet that isn't a PDF file. If they try and access data on my machine, if they try and access, if I go into here and browse for a text file, they don't have permission to that file, but I can access PDF files. So there's a lot of granularity and a lot of control you can do with that. Now, the next part I want to jump into here is the storage part. But before I do that, and you don't have to ask the question in the chat. If anyone wants to raise their hand as well, please feel free to speak out because my voice is slowly disappearing. But does anyone have any questions around about the ring fencing or around about the application control? Give everyone 30 seconds to. No, it seems like no questions there. Okay, so the next part of this I'd like to go into is the storage control. Now, the idea with the storage control is, first of all, that we log everything. So, and this is to protect from both insider threats, but also external threats. So if something's accessing your data that shouldn't be, you want to know about it. So if somebody goes onto your file server and they create a document on your, this is my loopback file server, and they copy that document to a USB drive, it gets blocked because we've got a deny USB policy in place, but then copy it to their desktop, delete that file, no, open that file even. So I'll open it in Notepad, I'll edit that file, save it, delete it. Everything, the full history of that file is logged in the audit here. So we can go in here. And again, it doesn't matter if they're in the office or sitting at home. So if they're working on documents sitting at home, if they're copying things to USB drives, if someone's sitting in Starbucks copying something to a USB drive, you're going to be able to see that right from the audit here. I know people don't sit in Starbucks anymore. We sit in our cars after we go through the drive-through. But back in the old days again, when Starbucks was somewhere we could meet up and they're using their laptop, they're on the Wi-Fi, you can see what they're doing with that file. You can see somebody access this file using Explorer. They read it. The user, the computer, they then tried to copy it to a USB drive. They then copied it to their desktop. They then edited the file using Notepad, or read the file using Notepad, edited the file using Notepad. So you can see that they wrote the file, they're using Notepad, the user, and then deleted the file. Again, you'll notice there when I copied it to the USB drive, or at least tried to, you can see the drive wasn't encrypted. You can see the serial number and you can see it was denied. The next part of this is the ability to create policies. The audit's great, but the power and the control over what can access your data and who can access your data is even more important. So somebody's asked a question here. When you first install ThreatLocker out of the box and after the initial install and monitoring period, how much protection is there by default, assuming there's some level of default protection such as ring fencing vital processes? So yes, out of the box, when you first install, the suggested policies and the whitelisting is going to give you huge amounts of protection. The whitelisting, after the learning, it's not going to let you run anything that's not trusted, anything that hasn't been learned, and anything from there. The next part of it is the ring fencing policies, the suggested policies that we put out there straight out the box, the stopping PowerShell accessing your files, stopping Run DLL accessing your files, going out to the internet, is going to offer you a huge level of protection. Just out the box. If you get, and most managed service providers aren't getting into massive amounts of detailed policies because their clients tend to be so difficult or different. So the bulk of the policies are going to help. If you want to get into more advanced policies, you could always ask our team to help you with that too. The next question that's been asked is, how long do we keep the audits for? By default, we keep the audit for 30 days. We have options for extensions up to 7 years. It obviously costs more money. Somebody's asked for the pricing. The pricing, I'm not going to discuss it here because the webinar is public, but as a 20 member, the pricing, you get some special pricing, and we can send you pricing after the event too. If you just send an email to Danny@threatlocker.com, I'll make sure somebody reaches out with pricing for your environment. But it's typically in line with what you would expect, not as expensive as a high-end EDR product, and in line with most antivirus products. And we do not have a Mac version available at the moment. It is currently in development, hopefully delivered by the end of the year. Certainly going to burst the questions here. What's the average CPU load on the machine? The CPU should be 0% most of the time. The only time you'll see it go up is the initial scan of your hard drive. It'll use one core. And that on a solid state drive takes about 5 minutes. Nobody's ever reported it as noticed. On a magnetic, it can take 30 seconds. If you do deploy policies, you might see it spike for a second, but most of the time it's going to sit at 0%. So you shouldn't expect any increase in traffic there. One of the nice things about this approach actually on that is an AV has to do an awful lot to try and figure out if there's a threat. The first thing it does is it checks, is this on the blacklist, yes or no? And that's pretty low overhead. And that's why AVs in 1997 didn't kill the machines. But the next thing they have to do is they have to decompile the code. They have to try and sandbox it. They have to try and look if it's doing something suspicious. Because we're very binary in our decisions, because we're saying, is this program allowed to run, yes or no? It's a lot less resource intensive than an antivirus. Is this file allowed to open, yes or no? We're not having to put it in an environment, see if it's doing something bad. So most of our responses are actually recorded in less than a millisecond. And even a slow response, we're seeing 20 milliseconds versus an antivirus. Sometimes you can see and open a file and it could take 10, 15 seconds for it to come back with an answer. Now, the next part of this is the storage control. And we've shown you the audit on that, but there's also the ability to create really granular policies. So to give you an example of a very simple policy, we could say here, block USB drives. We could just simply say block, deny read and write access to anyone in the workstations group on a USB drive, whether it's encrypted or not, whether it's all users, all programs, and don't let this policy expire. That's a really basic policy. with that in effect, somebody can essentially, if someone tries to use a USB drive, it's going to get denied. They're going to receive a pop-up. If you're on the computer, you could grant it for 15 minutes based on the serial number for an hour, permanently, whatever you'd like, or the user can hit request permission. You can get a ticket in your PSA and you can approve it straight from a link in the PSA, a text message, an email. And again, I'm going to say here, I'm going to approve access to this USB drive, read and write access based on the serial number for every computer in this group. So I can take this disk to any computer in the group. I can use it and it's fine. That's it. That serial number is trusted. And we can see here it created a policy. And within 30 seconds, the user can access that drive. Now, we can also get much more granular than that. And I could talk all day about these policies, but I'll give you a few examples. I could say, actually, this is a digital camera, and I only want the user to be able to read JPEG files from it. And I only want you to be able to, and only if it's encrypted or only for certain photo import app. So in this case, I've just said, just use US JPEG files. I could click on here. I can go into the USB, give it 30 seconds to deploy. And if I try and open a text file now, apparently I didn't wait long enough. Did I do that policy right? Permit, read, JPEG. Seems my policies have taken longer to download today. I'll let that replicate and then I'll jump back to that. But yeah, it's very, very easy. You can restrict it at a very granular level. The next, somebody's asked a question. We mentioned the feature about allowing non-admin users to install Elevation. Yes, and we have been delayed on this. It's one of the few features that's really struggled to get through our QA process, mainly because of the security available. That feature is actually pre-beta right now. It should be beta within what month are we on? By May. And what that allows you to do is to permit certain applications to elevate even if the user isn't an administrator. So we are looking for beta testers on it. So if you're interested in beta testing, please let us know. Now the next, that policy should have deployed by now. So you can see now that the user can't open this file because it's not the file type, but they can open a JPEG file. And again, they can't copy that from here. Okay, so somebody has asked the advantages of this over a privilege management, an auto elevate or policy pack type product. The problem with controlling elevation is that it's essentially just stopping you become an administrator. And like I said at the beginning of this call, you don't need to be an administrator to encrypt files. You can encrypt everything that the user has access to without being an administrator. You can run a program, you can install a Chrome extension without encrypting, without being an administrator or even having extra privilege. If an application can run, it can access everything you can access. Even if I don't elevate, I can run a program on this machine. I can encrypt files. I can download data. If I go into this file here, this copies everything from my network shares onto a remote host. If I'm not an administrator, I can still run that and it can still take my data. The advantage of this is we're saying things don't run and it doesn't matter how they come in. And ultimately, for ransomware to run, for ransomware to encrypt your files or a program to steal your data, it has to execute. If you stop it executing, whether it's a DLL, a script file, a program, a Chrome extension, it doesn't matter. If you stop it executing in the first place, it can't steal your data. Now, another example of a storage policy that's really, really effective, and you saw we installed Notepad++ there, we allowed that. We didn't ring fence it. So essentially now that it's installed, we've trusted it, it can run, it can access everything that the user could access. But we can also create storage policies, almost ring fencing policies around your storage devices too. So in this case, we've said, this is my file server. The only thing I want to be able to access my file server is Office and Notepad and a few other programs here. And we can auto-populate that based on a learning period again. If something tries to access my file server, the USB drive is going to drive me insane, there isn't that program, it's simply going to be denied. So I'm going to, as an example, I could open this in Notepad because it's allowed to access my file server. Notepad++, I just installed it, it's on the whitelist, it's allowed to run. but it's not allowed to access my file server. So even though I didn't ring fence it, it can't access it. This is really useful for a few things. So ring fence is going to stop the apps getting out, doing more than they should. But this here, the file storage policies are going to allow you to say, I have a file server and I only want Veeam to be able to access this. I only want Veeam to access my backup share or QuickBooks to access my QuickBooks share. So no other applications can access it. Users can't browse to it. It can't be, it can't be used against you, even if you do permit something. Again, these are lots of different layers of policies. These are different approaches to looking for bad stuff and blocking it. We're not letting it run to begin with. When we do let it run, we're ring fencing it and saying it can't do anything else. If we're not ring fencing it, we have the extra layer to say these storage devices can't be accessed by these programs. And on our new version 5.24, you can actually say from the file server side, don't let people write to files, don't let people read files, whatever you'd like on this file server if they're not running ThreatLocker on their laptops or their desktops. So if somebody brings in a computer that isn't ThreatLocker, you can define which files they can access and what type of privilege they have access to. Another very common example is blocking files being saved to desktop. It drives me insane when we go to trade shows, or we went to trade shows, and the sales guys would open up their laptop lids and they'd have 20 quotes or 50 quotes or 100 quotes on their desktop. So we put a policy in place saying deny write access to these file types on desktop. This is as much about good behavior as security, but if they can't save it on their desktop, we know it's being backed up. We know it's not being, someone can't go and access it or see it in a trade show where they shouldn't see confidential data. And, but it's very, very effective. So if I go here and I try and copy one of those file types to my desktop, so if I go into my share here and I try and copy this file here, that's going to be denied. And you can't, even if you're an administrator, you can't bypass that. And administrators get malware too. Another example policy that's really, really effective is denying write access to $C shares, denying write access to $admin shares. So if you don't have personal firewalls, you can stop people pushing out malware through those shares. Of course, if you're using the whitelisting, you're using the ring fencing, it can't run anyway. But if we can stop them pushing it over the network, it's even more effective. We can do that. And again, all of this is audited. So if someone is accessing network drives, if somebody is accessing USB drives, if they are copying things, you can see that on there. So somebody's asked a question, and what are your thoughts on next-gen AV products and ThreatLocker working together with them? Is there an argument for also using a next-gen AV product, or does next-gen AV become unnecessary? So I think that word unnecessary is extremely strong, but we have clients who just use Windows Defender with ThreatLocker. We have banking clients that just use Windows Defender with ThreatLocker, and they have never had any breach of malware running. And in theory, ThreatLocker, or in practice, ThreatLocker doesn't let anything run unless it's trusted. I don't think that we're in a position to say you should never, the more security you have, the better. So if you're choosing between, if you're saying, can I use an next-gen AV? Can I use an EDR? Or whether next-gen AV and EDR kind of cross over a little bit. Can I use a normal AV? Can I use a threat hunting system? Can I use an antivirus and a threat locker? That's great. If you can use everything and you have the budget to use everything, as a security professional, it's perfect. But you also have to decide what's more important in your budget too at some point. So do you need next-gen AV? I would never recommend against it. Because I'm a security buff, the more you have, the better you have. But we do have a lot of clients who don't use next-gen AV with ThreatLocker, just use standard AV, who use, and that word next-gen is kind of a little bit, it depends who you're talking to too on what it means. But you definitely should use an antivirus with ThreatLocker, some kind of antivirus, because we won't tell you something's malware. We'll tell you we don't know what it is, but we won't tell you it's malware. We'll give you links to VirusTotal, but again, we're not going to stop it. The more security you can use, the better. In terms of the priority of security, and of course I am prejudiced here, it's more important to lock your door at the beginning than to try and remediate afterwards. If you can have a remediation product and bolts on your door and a house alarm and a guard dog, that's absolutely great. But given the choice of, do I want to get rid of my house alarm or do I want to take the locks off my front door, I'm always going to get rid of my house alarm first. And essentially ThreatLocker is the bolt on the front door that stops people coming in. If you can get a house alarm, I have a house alarm and I have a dog, not sure he'd do anything apart from make a lot of noise. and I have security cameras in my house. So it's great to have as many layers as you can, but always start by not letting things run that shouldn't do. Somebody's asked the question, if somebody's a local admin on the machine, can they just stop threat locker service to get around it? If you have tamper mode on, which is on by default now, if you are an existing threat locker client and you deployed 6 months ago or more than 6 months ago, make sure you do have it on. You can go into the computer groups page here and turn it on. But if you have tamper mode on, you cannot stop threat locker. You cannot tamper with the registry keys. You cannot edit or change files in the threat locker folder. You cannot kill the process. It's completely locked down, and it's very, very difficult to do. Well, actually, I would say it goes as far as saying it's impossible to stop, but I don't think the word, there's no such thing as possible, but it's really, really hard. We've had clients before who have had tombstone machines with tamper mode on, and they deleted the machines from the portal. And now when you delete them, we just remove them in the front end and they can come back later on. And then they try to reinstall, they turned on this machine after a month of it being inactive, and they could not get threat locker off. And we had to manually insert things in our database so they could reinstate and turn off tamper mode. So hopefully that's answered that question. So the idea of this is ultimately, step one, stop things running that shouldn't run. If it can't run, it can't encrypt your files, it can't delete your files, it can't copy your data, and it can't harvest your passwords. Step two is when something's running, don't let it access more than it needs to. Don't let Chrome, don't let Internet Explorer, don't let Office call PowerShell, launch attacks with tools that can be weaponized against you. And then take those tools that can be weaponized against you and ring fence them. Ring fence, if it doesn't need to access your files, if you see Angry Birds running and you want to allow it to run, if it doesn't need to access your file shares, your network shares, just say ring fence, you can't access it. That way it can't be exploited and used against you. And if it doesn't need to go out to the internet, don't let it go out to the internet or limit where it can go out to the internet. Then use storage policies to further lock down your storage devices and harden your environment. I think we have a little bit of time if anyone has any final questions. Like I said at the beginning of this call, we are offering something. We get everybody's busy. If you're a managed service provider, you're under the gun, you're under pressure to get your customers working from home, call us up, push out the agent. We will help you lock this down, and we will help you with the approval request for the next 2 months. We do have 24-hour support. Our average response time is 48 seconds. So if you are in a bind where you need help and you need to deploy, whether it's deployment help or figuring out how to allow something, or just a customer needing to permit something in the next 60 days where they take advantage of us doing the approvals for you, you can make use of that. It's very, very easy. Just push the agent out. We have the scripts for all the RMMs there. Okay, so somebody's asked the question, is threat ring fencing considered redundant if something can be blocked by threat locker right away? So yeah, the first step is don't let things run, but you can't block every application. Office, you can't block. RegServe, you can't block. If Office calls RegServe and runs a file as payload in memory, that's not something your AV can see or threat locker can see. Ring fencing is going to stop that. It's going to stop the applications that you need to run on your system that are often being used against you, attacks that live off the land, that are built-in tools that are being weaponized against you from being used against you. So if you ring fence those, it stops them accessing files when they don't need to. It stops them going out to the internet when they don't need to. It's essentially the final level of defense. If you can't run it, that's the best approach. Don't let it run. But ring fencing stops the tools that you can run being used against you. Okay, so if somebody asked, who do we email to help get our environment dialed and optimized? So you have a few options. If you're looking for a session where you want general optimization event advice, I would recommend you book an audit review on our calendar. So if you go on to, and I'll share these in the chat, calendly.com/threat locker. You can always go into here and you can book an audit review. And it's basically a review of your environment. We can help you go over things. We can help you set down policies, figure out what you're requiring. There's no charge for this. You can do it as many times as you want. We try and encourage customers to put this on their calendar every 90 days anyway, even if they don't choose not to use it. But you can go in here, you can book a session. So if you go into Monday, there's a few. We're booked out a little bit busy this week. We do have a few more engineers starting next week, which will help. But if we go into next week, we should be a lot. That's a demo. Audit review. If you go into next week, You can go into here, you can book a session. These guys can help you with deployments. They can help you with set down your environment, and just book a session. So it's calendly.com/threat locker. And I'll post that in the chat window for everyone as well. You can also book a demo if you want from there. I know we've just done a webinar, which kind of covers most of the demo, but if you did have other people who wanted to see a demo, you can book a demo from there or a deployment call. So the other thing is, if you do need support at any point in time, the best way to get it is from the portal page. Just click get help from a cyber hero at the bottom, and somebody will reply. The average response time on that is 48 seconds. We are there 24 hours a day. So somebody should be able to help you with that. I think that's the last question, unless I'm missing one of the mediums. The question does, if you do want to sign up for a trial, I'll put one. If you don't already have a trial, I'm gonna put the sign up link in the chat there as well. So sign up for a trial there. I recommend that when you sign up for a trial, book a deployment call so someone can help you with your deployment options. We really do have great scripts for RMMs, Automate, Kaseya, that is going to make your life a lot easier. I spoke to a client yesterday. They'd literally added 200 of their customers manually into the organizations page, then matched the IDs for the customer with the Kaseya. And I said, if you just deployed it from Kaseya, it would have done that for you. So, it's worth spending a little bit of time booking a deployment as well. Okay, so okay, well, it appears there's no more questions. Again, if you do like to sign up for a trial, if you want to get enrolled on that issue on that service we're offering, where we'll do your audit reviews for you, just reach out to live support, let them know. We'll send you the form over. We'll get you involved. Let us know what your parameters are, because obviously we're making decisions for you now. So if you say allow any software that you reasonably think is not ransomware or bad, and we're probably going to do a lot more than you to go and verify that. We're going to go out to the website to look at the information on the software. You can do that, and you can say don't allow remote access tools. So give us some boundaries on what you want, just kind of what you'd say to your support guys. We're actually pretty smart. We know a lot about security, so we're not of course not likely to go and permit something that shouldn't be permitted without verifying it first with you. So if you'd like to do that, just reach out to the live support. Okay, I think Misty, Mike, I appreciate you setting this up. I appreciate you joining us. Thank you for your time.
Yep, thank you. That was good.
Everybody try and stay safe. Don't get sick. And, it is important, even though the world appears to be ending and it is the apocalypse, try and get your system secure, because the cybersecurity threats are not ending. Unfortunately, most hackers are not in the old and vulnerable category. So, so please get secure. Try and stay safe there. Okay, I'll end the meeting now. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.